Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Invite Gideon Behar to the podium to talk about more operationally how the foreign ministry sees this problem of anti-Semitism on the ground and what can be done about it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Professor Ganor, for inviting me to speak in this very distinguished conference. Well, usually I'm a very optimistic person, but when I come to speak on anti-Semitism, I'm more and more becoming pessimistic, because the situation of anti-Semitism in the world is very worrying. And if we do not take immediate actions today to stop and to counter anti-Semitism, the situation will deteriorate more and more. This is my main point on this lecture. I will go to the slide. Sorry. Okay. I would like to go through 4 main points. The first one is that anti-Semitism is significantly on the rise in the European Union. The second one is that Islamic radicalism or Islamic anti-Semitism is the main source of anti-Semitism today in the European Union. The third one is that the internet is a major contributor to the rise of anti-Semitism. The last point, which I will show later on, is what can be done to fight anti-Semitism. Now, allow me to elaborate on these points. We have all in mind, in our memories, the films, the photos, the articles that we've all read and seen during the Protective Edge operation. We saw the huge demonstrations in Europe. We saw people shouting Jews to the gas again for the first time in Germany since the Second World War. We've seen how much hatred was put into the Jews of Europe. This is not something new. This was built on a process that took already more than a decade, because organizations that monitor anti-Semitism, whether the CST in Britain, whether it's the SPG in France, whether it's the Cantor Center here in the University of Tel Aviv, where it is the ADL and others, all show a steady rise in anti-Semitism. I remember just maybe 2 years ago when a parliamentarian from the Jobbik party in Hungary was saying, let's count the Jews because they are a threat to our national security. We remember the Golden Dawn party in Greece denying the Holocaust very openly. And things like that were building and building and building in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Austria, in the Nordic states, in Sweden, in Denmark, and in many other places. The situation today now, ladies and gentlemen, is like that. Jews are afraid to be Jews anymore in the European Union. Personally, I couldn't believe it that after the Holocaust, again, Jews will be afraid to walk in the streets of Europe and taking away their kippas or taking away mezuzahs from homes or not wearing Magen Davids anymore. And I'm asking myself and others, what's going on? Is this something really? This is again happening in Europe, on European soil? Unbelievable. Many Jews today in Europe are opting for 3 options. And this is the beginning of a phenomenon. Under the stress of anti-Semitism and also under the stress of banning Jewish circumcision and Jewish slaughter in many countries in Europe, Jews are being faced with 3 options. One is to immigrate away from Europe. This is already happening. The second one is to assimilate. This also happening when Jews are taking away their kippas or mezuzahs or whatever, and to put themselves into enclaves of under security. When I travel in Europe and I stand for the weekend and I want to go to pray, it's very easy for me to recognize from a distance the synagogue. The street is closed, there is security, security cameras, etc. I do not know any other religion or religious minority in Europe that has to live like that. Nowhere else. And we are accepting it as normal. We are accepting it, and we should not accept this anymore. My second point is that Islamic radicalism or Islamic anti-Semitism is the main source today of anti-Semitism in Europe. As Charles Small was saying, Islamists are the shock troops of anti-Semitism today on European soil. Just when I used to give lectures just before the operation in Gaza, I would say that there are four major sources of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism of the far right or radical wings parties like Jobbik or Golden Dawn and others, Islamic anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism on the internet, and anti-Semitism which is coming from the left, the radical left. Today, I've changed my opinion. We have seen all the demonstrations. I've seen the demonstrations in Den Haag, for instance, where we saw ISIS flags, Al-Qaeda flags, Hamas flags, Hezbollah flags being raised in one of the most distinguished capitals of Europe. And what the people were shouting there? They were shouting, let me quote in Arabic, Khaybar, Khaybar ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad, Sawfa Yaud, which relates to a historical event at the beginning of Islam, when the first Muslim conquered an oasis in the desert in Saudi Arabia today, which was inhabited by Jews. It was called Khaybar, and massacred its inhabitants. And what is going to happen now? They are calling again for the massacre of Jews. Again and again. And it happened in other capitals of Europe. Can we accept it? It happened also in New York. Yes, there, in that big Jewish city, also happening there. We saw what was happening in France, in Sarcelles, in the suburb of Sarcelles, in Paris, where hundreds of Jews were, found themselves under a siege in a synagogue in the middle of Paris. Again, we saw how Jewish shops were attacked in Sarcelles. Riots against Jews. Anti-Semitism is very viable, and it is carried out again by second and third generation of radical Muslim immigrants in Europe. And this brings me to another point, the point of jihadists coming to Europe. You have heard it all. This is an immediate threat to the security of Jewish communities in Europe. In 2012, there was an attack in Toulouse, in France, against the Jewish school. 4 people were murdered. The person who carried it out was Muhammad Merah, a jihadist returning from Afghanistan, fighting for the Taliban. Again, in 2014, this year, a deadly attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels, 4 dead. And we keep hearing and hearing that police is dismantling networks here, terrorist networks here and there of Islamists that have objections to harm and to hurt and to attack Jews in Europe. I'm going to my third point, the point of the internet. Much is being said on the internet, but the internet also is a main field of anti-Semitism. If you go to Facebook, if you go to YouTube, to Google, to Twitter, you will find enormous amounts of anti-Semitism. I want to give you a challenge. Go to Google or go to YouTube and do a search, Jews are, or the phrase Jews are, and see what's coming out. You will find tons of films of anti-Semitic character in YouTube. If you do it in Google, you will find the Jew Watch, one of the most notorious anti-Semitic websites, comes to you second or third. And this is what people have to learn about Jews from the internet. You know Yahoo Answers, you know Wikipedia, also lots of things are written there, of anti-Semitic characters against Jews or the state of Israel or Judaism. So anti-Semitism on the web is a significant problem, and it pushes anti-Semitism on the ground. What's going on in this virtual world is immediately translated to the ground, immediately, in many languages. It can be in English, it can be French, Russian, but also Turkish, Persian, Arabic, Hungarian, Greek, and other languages. It's all over there. I'm coming to my last point. What can be done? Okay. First of all, we must be aware of anti-Semitism, of new anti-Semitism, of the technology brings with it new opportunities for anti-Semitism. One recently was an application for smartphones to download the protocols of the Elders of Zion in Arabic. Finally, it was removed. But these things are keep changing. There is no one form of anti-Semitism. There are many, many forms of anti-Semitism that support one another. So one should be, first of all and foremost, aware of it. Secondly, the responsibility to protect Jewish communities in Europe lies within the hands of European governments and within the institutions of the European Union. The Jews are of France, the Jews of Belgium, the Jews of Britain or Germany are first of all and foremost the citizens of their countries, and they should be protected and be given the right to live freely as any other European citizen. European governments and the European institutions have the most powers in their hands, the most tools to fight anti-Semitism. And there must be a real action now. Otherwise, it will be too late. It will be too late. I'm very pessimistic, as I said in the beginning of my lecture, because I think that what we saw during the operation in Gaza is only the beginning, because the undercurrent streams that push anti-Semitism in Europe are getting stronger and stronger, and it will continue like that. Prohibit anti-Semitic demonstrations. I think this is understood. Prohibit carrying the flags of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. Prohibit people coming with face covered. Prohibit people from shouting and chanting anti-Semitic slogans during these demonstrations. Sorry, I just got mixed with the pages. Okay. Monitor and report anti-Semitism. Not all European countries monitor anti-Semitism, at least in a coherent way. There is a need to monitor it, like what is done in the United Kingdom or in France, and to report. Most of the victims of anti-Semitism do not report on anti-Semite incidents. They are afraid, they say the police will not treat it, etc., etc. European governments and European institutions, again, have to encourage, have to take actions, and it was recommended also by European institutions that that people should report on anti-Semitic incidents. New legislation. There is legislation against anti-Semitism or racism or genocides or Holocaust denial in some European countries. This is not enough. Not every European country has a legislation like this. I can tell you that, for instance, now Greece is passing these days is passing a very good legislation against anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. It should be served as an example. Education for tolerance and for Holocaust remembrance. Many of the newcomers to Europe do not share the core values of Europe. They are unaware of the history of Europe. When we meet with European representatives, with our colleagues in Europe, we tell them, guys, we don't need special actions from you. Defend your European values. Defend the values of freedom of speech, of equal rights between men and women. Defend the democracy. Defend the free speech. Defend the right for to practice your religion openly. when you defend it, when you work on it, when you teach, and you put an emphasis on European history, then included it, there will be also measures taken against anti-Semitism as well as against racism. The other point is isolate the Muslim extremists and engage and encourage moderate leadership. For me, it is unbelievable that people that preachers, Muslim preachers, can preach in many mosques in Europe against democracy, against human rights, against pronounce anti-Semitic slogans. This should be prohibited. I'm finishing. Encourage the moderates. It's very important. There are many, many moderates, Muslim leadership in Europe. I myself have lived 9 years in Muslim countries, 4 years in Tunisia, 5 years in Senegal, and I know it exists. I know you can cooperate. There is the Imam Hassan Chalgoumi from France. There is the mayor of Rotterdam, Abu Taleb. There is the Ahmadi movement in Europe. There are Sufi Muslims who are moderate. We can find partners and we should encourage them. If we do not do that, we leave the field only for the ones who are extremists. Regulate hate speech on the internet, this is another point, and encourage interfaith dialogue. This is also very important. When people talk to one another, walls are being reduced and people understand one another. So please let me finish on this maybe more optimistic notion. Thank you very much.